by Milton Acorn, from the new Milton Acorn Selected, which has been published by the same press as Anna's press, Mosaic Press. I have some extra copies of this tonight. If you'd like to get one, you can get them at a special price, okay, if you're interested in Milton's work. And I'm going to read his poem about the most famous Canadian. So, who was the most famous Canadian? Well, I think Anna knows, but maybe nobody else knows. Right, you in. Right,
Norman Bethune, eh?
Yeah.
Norman Bethune. And one of the little books I did on Milt is called Beyond Bethune, People's Poetry and Milton Acorn's Metaphor for the Canadian Fate. It's a collection of essays that I wrote about the themes that Milt was interested in. And I took as the epigraph for the book Milton's poem about Norman Bethune. But it's not just about Norman Bethune, it's wider than that. So I'm going to read that to you, and I'm sure, as Milt was a very clear poet, I don't have to explain anything of what he said. It's called Bethuniverse. Does a man 3 decades dead walk and make facial expressions among us? When we're shaving, do our eyes stray from the mirror? Then suddenly, in vision's discarded corner, do we see his face? Surely, there's a reasonable explanation. A strong old man gets on the elevator, even has a red sweatshirt, tan, tilted at that old angle. If I could see his eyes, I'd know that his eyes are screwed shut, as if in anguish, like many eyes. Opening, closing, record anguish. One sees him again, in many sizes, in many ages. Suddenly I realize there are many Bethunes. From many candidates, fate chooses both its victims and its heroes, often one and the same. Another necessity, another Canuck, and there could have been another Bethune. So many of us live in anguish because we were spared his anguish. Let there be a Bethune oath, improving on that of Hippocrates, to make curing no routine, but wars against disease. Strengthen health, increase and lead it, into all which must be done, all which must be felt, meant and seen. What are we doing? Brave Canucks, after 400 years, still a colony? Supplying the basic armstuffs to conquer a world which includes us. Since one of us swerved time from its course, there's been no rest. Why call it peace? I'm afraid I'm not up to Milt's standard. I've only written a few poems, and mostly I've sort of hidden them away. But this one did get into print. And it was written back in 1984 when I wandered downtown in Hamilton. And I noticed a sudden change. And in the course of my teaching today, I take my students down to Hamilton. All of my students are from mainland China. I've been teaching in this program for 15 years. And we look at the changes, amongst other things, that have happened to Hamilton over the years. And when I was there in 1984, I wrote this little poem, and I was writing this little poem when Louis Greenspan came along. Now, Louis Greenspan was a great friend of the Canadian philosopher George Grant. And although it may seem odd, George Grant, who's often understood as a conservative philosopher, was a great favorite of Milton Acorn. And that was largely because Grant had a very perceptive analysis of capitalism and industrialism, looking at the social dimensions in a great deal of depth. So I'm hoping this is a slight reflection of the sort of thing Milt might have said. It's called The Rape of Gore Park, Hamilton, for Louis Greenspan, who just happened along at the time when I was writing this. And I chatted about the point with him. I should mention just before I read it that the Dr. Tumblety referred to was a quack doctor, basically, an unlicensed doctor from the United States who'd come up to Hamilton in the mid-19th century, practiced there, specializing in women's diseases. He was a little shady when he was there, and he left under some pressure and went to London, England, where he was eventually arrested at the time of the Ripper murders. So he's a possible actual Jack the Ripper. He was let go because of insufficient evidence, but a cloud always hung over his head. So you'll see how I'm using him in the poem. Who did the deed? The ghost of Dr. Tumblety? Nobody knows. Overnight it came, the zeitgeist in the guise of lower-level lackeys of the Parks Department, cutting down trees, uprooting flower beds, set out in 19th century pride around the fabled fountain, scattering bums and memorials back to the beginnings of Barton Township in its mud and swamp and choleric camps, leaving only Victoria parked on her plinth. The citizens are outraged. The Parks Commissioner has posted a reward. The council declares its innocence. The Spectator, the newspaper, the Spectator has recorded the spectacle and made its speculations. It's 1984. The Industrial Revolution has eaten its children. Bon appetit.